Welcome to the Moms I Know with Sheila Walsh-Dunton and Maria Anderson-Farner. Two moms on a mission to reclaim childhood and take you from surviving to thriving on your parenting journey.
Let's go ahead and blame the mother. Tell the pregnant woman she must eat, feel, and birth perfectly for the well-being of the fetus. She inevitably fails at this, but still holds out hope she will be a glowing mother of her baby. Then, at the peak of her sleep deprivation, possible vaginal collapse, physical depletion from nursing, and isolation from a partner who doesn't get it, she gets a little angry at the world. But do not feel your anger, honey. Transmute it with breathing exercises and yoga you cannot do because either you can't move that way anymore or there's no extra time. Become superhuman, even though no one is meant to be not human. Whatever you do, do not expose your dear baby to your darkness. You are not allowed to have darkness. Bullshit. This sounds like a military operation.
Hi, this is Sheila.
And this is Maria.
And we want to welcome you to The Moms I Know.
And that is a quote from the brilliant Molly Caro May, our guest today on The Moms I Know. Wow. Molly, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to read just a little bit about Molly and tell all of our listeners. So she's a writer here in Bozeman, Montana, whose work explores body, place, and the foreign familiar. Her most recent book, Body Full of Stars, Female Rage and My Passage into Motherhood, was named a searingly eloquent memoir by Kirkus and an excerpt in Time and Lenny Letter. Her first book, The Map of Enough, One Woman's Search for Place, was called Addictive by Elle magazine. She teaches writing workshops across the country, and her mission is to democratize expression and work with story as a healing tool. Molly grew up in 5 countries and now makes a home in Bozeman with her husband and 2 daughters. And we are so excited to have you here today with us, Molly, to talk about this topic of female rage and your passage into motherhood. We are also going to talk a little bit about your previous work, the book, The Map of Enough, and also the whole concept of parenting. Having had children myself and having gone through the birth of 5 grandchildren now as well, working with their families and working with many, many, many mothers over my entire adult life and even some of my teen years, I've seen that there is this dichotomy of what is reality and what we present to the world, or what is this expectation and what really is happening in the psyche of the new mother's mind. And so I want you to talk a little bit about, obviously we want to talk about your journey and where you went, but I want to talk a little bit about some of your background so we get a little sense of who you are and your sort of passage into motherhood.
Great, yes. So I grew up all over the world, moving every few years. My father grew up that way, his parents grew up that way. And so I was exposed to a lot of different people and in many ways of life as a child. And that is a really core part of my foundation as a person. I think it infused a curiosity in me in terms of like why people do what they do, why we feel what we feel, all of those pieces. I think people can have that if they grow up in one place too. But for some reason, for me, that became really global in terms of how I see the world. So I was always wondering that, and I never necessarily thought I was going to be a writer. I didn't have writer people in my family. I didn't have artists in my family, but I always liked to write and read. And at some point, it became clear that this was something I really wanted to look toward or pursue. I didn't have any models. I didn't really know any people. But for me, it was a way of making meaning of my life. And now, I'm almost 40. I can't really imagine not having that tool. There have been studies done on expressive writing where people who are able to make meaning of their stories are better off, like more in terms of mental health, because they have a sense of beginning, middle, end, or sense of why or purpose or how this moved them into their next passage. So for me, writing as a tool has been critical. And, when I wrote The Body Full of Stars, which was the second book, I had a sense of an audience calling the book out of me. And when I say that, I don't mean like I'm special, I'm the perfect one to write the book. It was more that I had a sense that whatever it was that I had experienced, there were women out there who were, without knowing they were doing it, were calling it forth from me because there was something in it that was going to help them. And I just happened to be the vehicle that was going to put this on paper. I really felt that, not so much with the first book, but the second book, 100%. So for me, writing is a communal experience.
That's so
Yeah.
interesting, because that vision of not just expressing it for yourself, but for the people that needed to hear
Yeah,
it. And so I
totally.
really appreciate that. And that's so interesting, because your first book, The Map of Enough, for me,
Mhm.
it when I was reading it, I think I was one of those audience members that maybe was
Mm.
looking for you to pull it forth, because
Mhm.
I grew up in one place my entire
Mhm.
life and always yearned for that adventure. And so reading
Mm.
yours and reading this, The Map of Enough, this journey of you finding your own place and settling down in one place, beautifully written book about you and your husband building the yurt on the land. And so, that story really resonated for me. And so when we look at it like the people that are supposed to be getting our message,
Mhm.
then I think that helps us to express ourselves so much
Totally.
more clearly. And with writing as a tool, that's lovely.
Mhm.
I had a question for you. When you were traveling and when you were
Mhm.
growing up, were you observing motherhood
Mm.
and
That's a
the
really good
way in
question.
which mothers were mothering
Mhm.
and being supported in different cultures, or is it
Um,
something that came later?
That's interesting. I think because I grew up in sort of an expat scene. So what that means is that most of the parents were business people, or I should say most of the fathers were business people. The mothers were home with their kids, and the mothers had, you wouldn't call them nannies then, but had women who were helping in the house, either to clean or care for the kids. So we had a woman named Ida who was Dominican, and she lived with us and she did all the things. My mom was still parenting us, but she was very much with us a lot of the time. And so it was a completely different setup than the one that I'm living as a mom. And I mean, my mom would go out, and see her friends, or she would go to a dinner party, that kind of stuff, in a way that I don't do as much. So I think I was parented in some ways by more than just my mom, and my dad wasn't really in the parenting picture, because had a traditional setup where he was working and she was home. So I wouldn't say that I was thinking a lot about all the different mothers culturally, because I was in school, and so I don't think I was really exposed to like Dominican mothers, Mexican mothers, Spanish mothers. I didn't really have a sense of that. All my friends were from all over the world. So, it was hard to say. It's a good question though.
Yeah, but that's interesting. So you grew up in that sort of expat village where there was that extended community, and maybe in those cultures that you're in, that was just the expectation. It wasn't so much, I look around the world today, and regardless of the economic situation, a lot of cultures have a whole different view on the family life. And so, there is that idea in our culture of the nanny or the au pair or somebody that can help, or even just, if we have the means to get the help that we need. But in so many cultures, it's just built in. There's aunts, there's grandparents, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. I want to talk about that intergenerational. But so that's so interesting. So then you and your husband found, you came to the land, you built a yurt with your own hands. And it's so interesting. Right now at the Bozeman Museum of the Rockies, there's an exhibit on Genghis Khan and the Mongolian people. And so there's a beautiful yurt there. And I was able to take my grandson and show him this yurt that was obviously handmade. And, you and your husband built your yurt by hand. And that's so beautifully described in the book, The Map of Enough. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of that idea of settling down and sort of preparing for what was to come?
Absolutely. We moved here without the intention of settling here. We had been living in New York City, and we were both sort of launching into our artistic careers, and we needed a place that was going to be affordable and beautiful to be. And so this worked out, and then it ended up being the right place, the right community for us. But it was a real struggle for me, because I was in a patterning, right? Which is that every 2 years I move and reinvent myself. And I was used to that my whole life. And there was an excitement around that. There was this sense of, I want to always be learning something new. I don't want to be static. And I had the idea that if I was in one place, that would be static. And so I had a lot of push and pull. And yet I yearned for a foundation and roots. And I yearned to know what the trees are and what the plants are and what the animals are, and to feel like I belonged to a place. So building the yurt was amazing, hard for me because I'm just not a builder, all those pieces, but living in it and being so connected to this particular piece of land, it's essentially a tent. So you're hearing everything, and really rooted me in that place. And now, 10 years later, I really can't imagine. I mean, I can imagine going somewhere for a year and coming back, but I can't imagine leaving here completely, which I would have never thought. And the settling, I think I knew in my body. You know, I was 30 years old. We were about to get married. We'd been together for 10 years, but I knew I'm feeling an energy of a little person, and I want to invite that little person in. And so I had that sense. I mean, that didn't happen for another 3 years, but I was starting to feel it. And when you feel that, your body, at least my body, was very much wanting to be, you know, grounded. And that was part of that.
So you were, in essence, nesting already,
Totally.
you know, that sort of primeval urge to settle down, to create this space for you and your husband and for the child or children to come. Fascinating.
Yeah.
In The Map of Enough, you share details of your life that is pretty personal, that are very personal. And I wanted to ask you a little bit in your writing, is that difficult to do? Is there a process that you go through when you share, when you're writing of your own personal life and you know that that's going to go out into the world?
I would say that I don't, when people talk about memoirists, sometimes they will say, oh, it's your confessional writing, you're sharing everything. And I don't subscribe or ascribe to that. I think it's really important to keep something for yourself and keep some mystery. And not in the sense of like, I'm ashamed or I don't want to share that or it's a secret, not so much that, but just, you know, at that moment, that's for me. That's not for the world. And if it becomes for the world, the energy of it changes. And so I feel I made choices around that. You know, there are certain moments with my husband where I thought that's really too special actually to put in my book on some level. But there are other moments that are really special that I felt okay sharing. So for me, I think it happens more in retrospect, like with Body Full of Stars now. I think back and go, wow, did I tell people that? You know, even though in the moment it was so raw that I just felt like I had to, and the map of Enough too, I felt like I had to get those pieces out. So I don't really go through a major screening process. I just write it, and my mantra for myself and for my students is I trust my own brilliance, which means I trust whatever it is that is coming through me at this time. And I might edit it out later, but I trust that it's making passage in the way it needs to. So it's not a big debate I have with myself in terms of that. But yes, there are pieces that feel really intimate, and I think it's important for those conversations to be alive. You know, that's part of my offering, right?
So what's interesting about your journey too is, well, it's interesting for me because I met you right around the time that the Map of Enough was coming into being. And so, you know, I met you in those early years and then read the Map of Enough and got these insights into who you are as a person, as a woman, as a writer, and that struggle for, you know, search for place and the rootedness, and then knew you for those years in between. And then also got to read Body Full of Stars and see the journey that you went through as a young mother with not realizing how much you had been going through because you were able to sort of put on this, you know, the superwoman facade of everything that you were doing. And so it's really interesting, having read the books at that pace, I have that advantage, I feel, of getting to know you a little bit and getting to see what you were comfortable sharing and what was maybe held back a little bit. And then with Body Full of Stars, really you dive so deeply into this idea of motherhood and the passage into motherhood, and then allowing that space for all of the emotions to be there. I have to say that, you know, I grew up in a time where we just kind of coped, or we just did it, and we didn't talk about that a lot. My family, that was very much the way that my family was raised, you know, that I was raised as well, that we just dealt with those things. And so this ability to now dig down and to really look at our emotions, our experience, and to be able to express it is so powerful. And I think that that's what people are really resonating with, this openness, this honesty, and this awareness that it's not always easy and that we have to acknowledge all the pieces of ourselves. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your coming to terms with your emotions and being able to write about them.
Yeah, the rage piece in particular, or anger, is so as we know, layered for women.
Yeah.
I mean, has been layered for millennia for women. And it's so of the time now, feels like, you know,
Yes.
which is interesting. And I think for me as a child, teenager, you know, when I'm out of balance, I'm irritable. I know that about myself. I'm a Pitta in the Ayurveda model. Like, I know that that's just my way. So for me, anger wasn't a new thing. It wasn't like, oh no, I've been quiet and gentle my whole life and suddenly I feel angry. But I wouldn't say that I was angry all the time. It was just, I get just grumpy when I'm out of balance. But the quality of the rage that I felt postpartum was different, and it felt ancestral, and it felt like some of it was mine. It felt like some of it was my mother's, some of it was my grandmother's, some of it was like all the women. I've never been raped. It was all the women who've been raped, like things that I have not experienced. I felt like I was holding, and I don't think this is unique, I think a lot of women feel this, holding a lot of this collective anger. And it was largely directed at men. And just for context, the man in my life, my husband, is like a gentle lamb, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He's incredibly grounded, incredibly gentle, equal, egalitarian, all of that. But I suddenly felt incredibly righteous and incredibly shocked that, especially after birth, my thought was, wait a minute. So we do all this, and what do they do? Like, I mean, really, that was my thought. I just couldn't believe that this is how the world has been designed. Like, so women, you know, carry, birth, do all this, and then, and now I have a more nuanced and adult perspective on that. But at the time, physically in my body, I just would look around and see all these women and think, how is this fair? How does this work? And also I had the same feeling of, well, poor guys, like the men, they never get to even feel what birth is like. Like, they never get to access that. I'm so lucky. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's like, I mean, that's the most supreme experience I've ever had, even in the pain of it. And so it just blew open my perception on gender roles. And also I think the anger for me was so embodied, right? It's so much about like the female body and what gets done to the female body, said about the female body, expected from the female body. And then suddenly you're growing a baby and birthing it, and that opens a portal, I think, to all those feelings that maybe you haven't allowed yourself to feel, and suddenly they're very present. So I was feeling all the things that all the younger me's had felt a little bit, but maybe not really felt into. So in that way, it's like one of, you know, like menses is a portal, you know, childbirth is a portal, menopause is a portal. I really feel like these hormonal portals just open it up, and suddenly we're feeling all the feels, and we get to do what we want to do with that, is my perspective.
So powerful.
Yeah.
And I do feel that when we give birth, we're aware of our own power.
Mm-hmm.
We're aware of our own vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also aware of, it's as if our skin just evaporates and we're able to feel everything so powerfully. And so to acknowledge that, and to be able to work with mothers, and to be able to get that support, and to be able to have, you know, other women that have gone through it, to be able to talk about it, to be able to express it, whether we write it, whether we talk about it, whether we are in community or in isolation, to deal with that in some way is so very important.
I think your book is so valuable to young mothers to know that they are not alone, you know, because I birthed my youngest 10 years ago, and I'm just like, you're validating my feelings from 10 years ago. So I can't imagine how empowering this is for women to read it in this postpartum period, or even beforehand. What I love though is the wisdom that you share about being connected to women's body. We have, you know, I think from the patriarchy, we have medicalized birth so much. We've been so disconnected, like, you know, how we are supposed to be. And that is bullshit. You said that in your quote. And it's just like, how can we help women understand that birth is how it should be, and this is okay, you know? And like, what can you say to moms, new moms, or about women about to be moms, that to let it flow? Like, you know, I mean, how can we get connected with our bodies? What can we look for to reconnect with our bodies, because we have been so disconnected. And especially, I think the media, the screens, people, I'm watching babies in the strollers and the moms are on their phones and, like everything, just not being a part of it. Do you have any advice to how to reconnect with your body?
Yeah, that is such a good and eternal question.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still living that, or living into that. I think I always will be, really. I think what's interesting is that, the first part is that I think that if a woman has not been connected to her body, which was not my case, but I've witnessed it or seen it, and then she goes to give birth, like, she's getting connected to her body, no matter what happens, no matter how the birth happens. It's like, I think that's the beautiful part of this, or even the menstrual cycle, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, you cannot ignore this moment because it is right in your face. So I think there's like a sort of a natural built-in system, biology that is going to invite a woman every month or at these portals to really just be connected. And of course, women can choose to medicate that and not connect into that, and that's a choice. And I do believe in choice also, but in terms of like just actively connecting into the body, gosh, for me, it's like a rewinding and into a, I don't know if daily practice is the right thing, but into a practice of just paying attention and allowing all the things. I think that's the thing that's tricky, is that when people pay attention to their body or connect with it, they're going to encounter some things that don't feel that good. And I think that's why it's not like everyone's going to go like run through the field and feel their hair flowing. That's not going to be the way people connect sometimes. They're going to connect with their body, and they're going to feel, the abuse they had as children for the first time, or they're going to feel that they don't like their body, or they feel heavy in their body, or they feel too light in their body, or whatever it is. And that's hard to feel. So I think there's a lot, I think it's patriarchy 100%. I think it's also just numbing, and we live in a culture that numbs. So for me, it's like taking those numbing agents out, and then allowing, and whether that's a screen or whether that's television or food or drink or whatever it is, or sex for people, like removing those and then just sitting with the feeling. But I think part of, and I don't even know if I'm answering the question, but I think part of the block there is that we have not been taught or conditioned to understand that it's what, as you said, it's okay that it's going to be messy when you connect with your body. Like it's going to have a lot of different things. One day you're going to feel really elevated and you're going to feel expansive, and another day you're going to feel, completely bogged down or in disconnect. But I think if we were taught that these are all okay things to feel, and it's just the rhythm and the pacing of life, we wouldn't be so scared, and we would just go into it and do it. So for me, it's like, that's the beginning of it. And that's what I try to think about with my kids. Like, yeah, you have a volcano spewing out of your mouth right now, to my daughter, and that's normal. Let's make choices around what we do with it. But I mean, it's normal to have a volcano in your body sometimes, just like it's normal to feel like you want to jump and sing. So anyway, I don't know if that fully answered it, but I think there's a lot of like pre-work that we have to go back to just how we think about what we're going to encounter when we connect with the body. There's a lot of literature out there about like, connect with your body, like feel into it. It's going to be amazing. So I think people expect that they're going to be, flying with the birds when they're in a yoga class. But you know what? They might go to yoga class and they might be flattened by it because they suddenly feel into this grief from whatever. And that's okay too, So I think it's like expectation, right?
I think that's it exactly, that expectation, and I think what you're saying is it's innate in all of us, but yet we don't have the power or the confidence to tap into it. We're scared of it. I know I'm, speaking for myself, sometimes those feelings, some of those rage feelings I remembered like throwing like a gallon of milk. I remember like being and I think I had 2 small kids at that time. And I don't think I've ever told anybody that except my family, but it's just like, but that was the reality. And yet the self-criticism, I don't want to say hatred, but just not liking that part of me, but yet knowing that that's part of me. That stuff was coming up, and allowing that. So if we can show that to our to our children, that's part of it, that like it's the kind of the thing where when we say, we want to hear from our children when they are good, type thing. And when they're acting out, we say, oh, we don't have time for that. Or like, conventional wisdom says, put them in their room and everything, when that feeling is okay too.
I think that if we had, like, in all indigenous cultures, we had ritual around this, right? So people would, in whatever way they did, they would ritualize, like, okay, so now I'm going to put on the costume of the angry beast, and I'm going to be the angry beast, or I'm going to be this person or that person. And so I think, and obviously I haven't experienced that in this lifetime, but the feeling, I think, is that these things are all normal, and these emotions flow through our bodies. And so let's create ceremony and container around it, so that we understand, like, this is part of life and human life. But we don't see that when we're little in our culture. And so we have these big emotions, and there's no container for them, and there's no communal container for them. And so they get put in boxes. And I think imagine if you were little and you're just watching the adults act out something about how anger moves through the body, then suddenly, okay, this is how anger moves through the body, and we used to do that. We all come from some indigenous culture from way back when. We all used to do that on some level. So I guess the answer would be, like, if you have ritual, that would be, amazing if we could all create ritual around that.
Yeah. That's beautiful, because we also know what happens when you have repressed anger, when you have repressed rage, what happens, right? Autoimmune disease, it comes out. So yeah, we have to normalize the ugly feelings.
And then the interesting thing, though, with the rage is, and where I am now with it, is that I think it's like I don't know if it's a step-by-step process, but I think there's the expression, the identifying of the rage. I am feeling rage. And then there is the expression of the rage, which is like, wow, whatever that is. But that can also become addictive, right? And that can become its own cycle. And if it's not then metabolized, or somehow metabolized so that it doesn't, like, live in your body, because that's not healthy either, to be just constantly rageful, which I think a lot of women find themselves now. They're just, like, living in rage, and that's not helping their health, and so I think that it's like the feeling it, expressing it, but then metabolizing it so that it doesn't destroy your body. Mm-hmm. And that is a whole other thing that I don't think we understand culturally. I think some people understand, but I think that we're not there yet as a culture to understand that.
No, but I think there are inroads. I think that
Yes.
this is, part of Sheila and my, journey here is just helping reach out to other women to talk about these things and to express that all of these feelings are okay. And one of our previous interviews was about, cultivating curiosity. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, I'm feeling this. Mm-hmm. Let me have a little curiosity with this. Then how do I want to express this? Mm-hmm. And, if I throw something, or if I scream, mm-hmm. or if I, whatever it is that I do in terms of dealing with it, but that like you said, metabolize it or process it, mm-hmm. so that it doesn't affect us. And our rage is not making a difference against the things that sometimes we're raging against. It's right. only affecting, sometimes it's affecting other people as well, but it really does affect us. And so this whole concept of, yes, how do we deal with it? And then I love this segue. How do we then take it to this next generation and allow them to have their emotions, to have their feelings, to honor their physical feelings, their emotional feelings. I look at parenting, Sheila and I talk about this. Parenting is a healing journey. Yeah. Parenting is a spiritual journey. Yeah. And then also, okay, now this is our opportunity to make a difference. We can parent more consciously. We can help our children to look at things in a different way. And hopefully this generation that we're now raising is going to be able to process this in different ways. And so, I do feel like there's so much out there that we are doing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that in the context of the intergenerational family life, because, you spoke to it with even just your early years where there was a little bit of a village. Both you and I are now living in these family situations where there's the 3 generations living side by side. With the joys and the challenges that brings up. And so while there's this lovely community and there's the grandparents nearby and there's the help, there's the support, there's the advice, there's also that the generational patterns. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. And, I know your parents, they're lovely people. My mother is still alive and she was just here recently. So we had 4 generations together. How to navigate that in ways that we pull the best out of that, but we also help you know, the older generations helping the younger generations, but also the younger generations then bringing the older generation a little bit more consciousness. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that is such a big topic.
I know. It
Good.
actually might be a topic for a future podcast,
Right.
but if you can just talk briefly about it here.
It's a great one. First of all, I think that because traditionally we did live in intergenerational communities, there is actually a real function between grandparent and grandchild, right? Like the grandchild brings the grandparent into the modern age. Like, this is how you use a phone, you know, or this is how you like turn the lights on in a new way. And the grandparent can do sort of the wisdom schooling, like this is how we are in our culture, and when the parents are out working. So I think there's actually that's a real function of that relationship. For me, in my experience, I live right near my parents. My mom watches my kids once a week, and my kids are very connected to my parents in a way that I was never connected to my grandparents. I mean, there's just a physical connection, there's love, there's just all of it. And my kids act out in front of my parents, which I never did with my grandparents because they were scary to me. Mm-hmm. So there's this sense of my grandparents are safe for my kids, so they can be all the things they need to be, you know, which is great and also tricky because then I'm trying to teach respect of elders, you know, these are our elders, like, and so there's a funny balance there. But it's been an interesting dance for me to own my own motherhood and to say to my mom, like, I got this, you know, like in moments she would be like, I think Eula needs a coat. And I'm like, hello, like, I got this. Like, I'm the mom, like, I will recognize that she needs a coat to go outside. And we're past that now, but in the early stage, my mom was always suggesting things like, do you need to bring a snack for her? Like that kind of stuff, which seems so petty, but it's actually big because there's this shifting of roles where the mom gets to step into her own motherhood and say, actually, I'm making these choices. I will, and I appreciate your advice, but like, allow me to be a mother, you know? And then in return, me allowing my mother to be a grandmother. And my mom was very clear with me and said, I am not going to watch your kids 5 days a week. Like, that's not what I'm doing with my life. I love them and I want to watch them 1 day a week, but I'm living my own life. So don't expect me to become the grandmother who's just going to drop her whole life to raise your kids. And that has been a really good thing for me, to respect her time and to respect her womanhood and to say, okay, like, I'm not going to take advantage of this or just assume that you're going to skip your Pilates class to watch my child. No, like, you need to go to your Pilates class. And so it's been a renegotiating of boundaries. And I think that's really healthy. And it's a win-win for everyone. Like, everyone, I want my children to have models who are more than me, right? And of course, there's different parenting styles. So my mom sometimes will say to me, I just don't remember you talking like this when you were 5, you know? And I'm like, well, I don't think I really had space to talk like that when I was 5. I don't know. Maybe that's it. But she also has some wisdom. You know, I mean, it's all of the above. And I'm like, well, the kids are now growing up in a whole different everything, different toxic soup, you know, even though we're as non-toxic as possible and just a different world. It's just constantly dynamic. And I think we've all learned, like, one thing that was really big for me was the word pretty, because I just feel like pretty for girls is really destructive. It's fine if it's like the 8th thing that someone says, but it's usually the first thing. And so my parents were unconscious of that because they didn't know in the beginning. And I had to say to them from the very beginning, when Eula walks in the door, please do not comment on her clothes, on her cute curly hair, on how pretty she is. Stop. Done. And at first they were like, whoa. And then very quickly they go, oh, you're right. Oh my gosh, you are totally right. And then they started seeing it everywhere, you know? And so they respect that now. And then we have these conversations back and forth around respect. So I think it's cool, you know? I think it's all good. Yeah.
So what I'm saying, this overarching conversation from your background to your early work, to the later work, to the rage, all the way into your present living situation, it's all this invitation to deepen the way we're looking at all of this, the way that we're thinking about the whole parenting journey, the whole raising of our children, of taking care of ourselves, of our relationships. And so I really appreciate that through, you know, today, the spoken word, we've been able to talk about all of those topics. And then in your writing, which I absolutely, you know, recommend to any mom out there to read this and really deepen that thought, those thoughts about motherhood and our sense of place and the whole family journey. So I really appreciate all of that you've shared today. And I look forward. I think the intergenerational conversation is going to merit a whole topic because it's fascinating there. I wanted to ask you before we close today if there are people that have been huge influences in your life. We always like to ask the person that we're interviewing.
That's a really good question. I have one friend whose name is Courtney Martin, who's a close friend. I met in New York when we were 25, and she has been a huge influence because she is the person who made me believe that I could be a writer, that of course you could be a writer at 25. Why wouldn't you be? That was and she's still one of my closest friends. That she's a peer in terms of age, but in terms of mentorship, just for that was really big for me. I sort of felt like I got permission in some ways to do what I wanted to do. The writer Terry Tempest Williams, I have only met her once or twice. Maybe you all know her, I don't know. But she, just through her writing, I feel like her writing gave me permission to be a writer. And when I met her in person, her presence was so genuine and kind, which isn't always the case when you meet writers at book readings, that I was really moved by her. And then in other interactions I've had with her through friends. And so I feel like she's a big one. I would say, and this sounds sort of cliche or cheesy, but big one right now is my husband. Like, we're renegotiating all of our patterning. It is so hard and it is so worth it. And he is my teacher, as we have with, and even when it's brutal. And that, wow, he's like inviting me to be the person I want to become, even when I resist. And so he's huge for me in that way. Recently, I co-taught a class with Kimberly Ann Johnson, and she has become a friend, and I am continually moved. She does somatic experiencing work, and which is something I'm training in now too. And I'm just really moved by how she takes that and intersects it with sex and birth and body. And so I feel influenced by her and the way that she takes that on. Gosh, there's so many more people, but I think that's good.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that, these are people that have been key players in your life, and interesting to hear that they have believed in you as well. And I think that that's one of the big messages, is that, we need to surround ourselves with people that support us, that believe in us. Anything else at this point that you'd want to add?
I think the only thing, especially in thinking about mothers who are going to be listening to this, I don't know, it can feel so isolating, and this is not a new thought, but I feel like it needs to be said a lot by lots of different people so that people hear it. But it can be so isolating, and you can feel like you're the only one throwing the gallon of milk, or you're the only one, who you're damaging your children because you fell on the floor crying when the dog had pooped on the floor and the baby's screaming and you're peeing all over yourself, like that, that kind of stuff. And I think once this woman that I coached, she was telling her postpartum story, and she had this beautiful line in it where she said that sometimes what you need is a diversion. And what she meant by that was that sometimes in that moment, you need to just walk outside and say hi to your neighbor, or you need to pick up the phone and call someone, or literally walk to the grocery store, or do whatever, just get out of the moment in any way. It doesn't have to be that you have to read a book on yoga or you have to meditate. It just means choose a different thing, even if it's simple. And I have found that in my life to be so true. Like, if I just pivot and I put my attention somewhere else, it doesn't mean I'm ignoring what's happening, but if I just pivot, and then suddenly the thing that felt so huge is not a tsunami taking my body over, and I can tend to it later. But I wish I had known that in my early postpartum time, because I was really so committed to feel all the feelings, tell all the truths, be in it. And sometimes being in it was not helping me, because I didn't have the tools, or I didn't have the support that I needed. And so I was just stewing and just in this poisonous muck all the time, not all the time, but often. And I feel like it would have helped me to divert a few times. And I thought that diverting was taking the easy path. And so I had this whole judgment around it, that I'm not going to ignore this feeling. I'm going to just feel it and feel all the gnarliness of it. And now I've learned that, you know what, sometimes you just need for your own well-being to divert, and then you can come back to that feeling when you have the support and the container for it. So anyway, that's a long-winded thing, but I feel like it's useful for that, you know.
That was lovely.
Wise words from Molly Caro May.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your insights, your wisdom, your passion. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So for those of you who would like to know more about Molly's work, you can reach her at mollycaromay.com or follow her on Instagram. That's MOLLYCAROMAY.com. And she has a wonderful Instagram feed, and she also tells more about her workshops and everything at her website. So I encourage you to check that out. And we will be talking to you next time from the Moms I Know. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today for the Moms I Know. To learn more about Sheila and her online program, The Mom Map, visit purplebeetnutrition.com. For Maria's monthly blog and to learn more about her group programs and retreats, visit soquelessentials.com. That's SOQUEL essentials.com. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Moms I Know. Until next week, have a joyful family journey.